I thought there must be people who had home movies in the 1930s who were at the Lowe's Motor Show who caught her. I've been to lots of places where people have actually showed movies from the 1920s, 1930s, home movies, little, but nobody's got Beatrix Potter captured on film, and nobody's got a tape recorder of her, even though she died in 41. Anyway, this awful story that one of Ruth's friends told me was that she actually loved Blackburn Rovers as well, and he would get the train from Kendal down to Ewood Park in Blackburn to watch the match and go off. And unbeknown to him, she would often go on the same train, or the train later, make sure she was not in the same carriage, stand at a different part of Ewood Park, then leave before the match was over to get an early train, was back with his tea ready by the time he came home. Now, in one way that's funny, but another way it's pathetic and sad and absolutely. So, one of the biggest things in the book was thanks to Betty. When you do these sort of books, it takes you, and my wife had the same, not problem, but the same experience when she was doing various people's books, like Daphne du Maurier's biography. The people that hold all the treasures, all the memorabilia, they don't quite trust you at first. And it's week by week when you go to see them and say, oh, I've just been in the attic, I found some more stuff. Oh, I did find that letter I said didn't exist. I did. So over the months, Betty would give me stuff which she'd never told me about it in the early days, like the Wainwright short story I'd written all those years ago. And she eventually showed me her love letters between her and Wainwright. And these were absolutely riveting, the love letters. We had to doctor them, the Wainwright letters, slightly. Not because they were rude, not because they were... But Betty, when the book was coming out, was a bit embarrassed by them. One of the things was he'd say, make sure you wear your red knickers. That was the level of the rudeness. So we took that out to spare her blushes. But the letters were so funny because it reveals this amazing, which would also be in the Hollywood version of Wainwright's life. Wainwright was going out with Betty, meeting her secretly and going to places, and she would drive him, but of course he was scared stiff as a borough treasurer of Kendal, and he would find out what was going on. But Betty was a divorcee and didn't want tongues to wag. And this bloke called Aidan something, I've forgotten his name now, it's in the book, was a wealthy, very wealthy widower who owned his own bank in Chicago or somewhere in America. And he was he'd somehow read the first and second pictorial guides. Don't know how he got copies, living all that way. And was a great Lake District fan, written fan letters. He came to Grasmere and he wrote to Wainwright, who didn't usually agree to such things, could he go walking with him? Just one walk would do it. It'd be his heart's desire to come to England and walk with Wainwright. So Wainwright thought, oh yeah, I know. I'll invite him, have a walk, and I'll bring Betty as well. So I'll be walking with the bloke and Betty. It'll be a brilliant cover. If I get seen, this will be an explanation. It was the three of us having a walk. It was all above board. And they did this for several days running during this bloke's holiday over here. He forgot to tell Aid that he was in love with Betty. And he forgot to tell Betty that Aid didn't know that he was being used as a cover. And you can guess what happened. Aid falls in love with Betty and proposes. Which, again, in the Hollywood... The one thing I tried very hard to find was, you probably remember this, but in 1985, the Western Gazette, who were probably the dopiest publishing house in the universe, they had no sales department. You had to go and get your own copies. You had to go and find it. They had no marketing or advertising or publicity department. And yet, and of course Wainwright had done nothing whatsoever. He'd done no signing sessions. He hadn't appeared anyway. His photograph was still not in the book. No interviews on radio or whatever. Nobody knew who he was. And yet in 1985, they woke up one day and realised any minute now they were about to sell the 1 millionth copy. Eat your heart out, Geoffrey Archer. He'd done absolutely nothing and had sold all these copies. So they decided, as a ruse, that the person who bought the millionth copy would get a prize. So they marked the millionth copy in a special way, and the prizes were a weekend at the Langdale timeshare. It was something else, some commemorative stuff.
Second prize 2 weeks.
Very much
coasters or something.
Some coaster, and you got to have dinner with Wainwright. He was talked into this and agreed, and then he suddenly decided, what have I done? It'll mean having a meal with a stranger. For some reason this hadn't struck him that, prize was a dinner with him, you'd have to have. And so he forced the Andrew Nichol from Westminster Gazette to go with him to track this book down. And according to the records, it had gone to Manchester, to a bookshop there. So they raced down to Manchester. Wayne, of course, didn't drive. And they found the shop, didn't tell the shopkeeper, who didn't actually know that the records at Westminster Gazette showed it had gone there. And he bought it from the shelf, and they took it back. Wainwright then was talked into, because they'd gone to all this trouble and done publicity, was talked into re-announcing the award, but with no meeting, no meal with Wainwright, just a free weekend at Langdale and the coasters. And the book went out again, and we think it went to Chaplin's. Do you remember Chaplin's? It was a bookshop in Keswick, now closed. And I've got some memorabilia, you see, I'll explain this in a minute. It went to Chaplin's. Andrew Nichol went on holiday, and when he came back, he checked at Chaplin's and it had gone, but nobody ever came forward. And the theory is that Wainwright, Andrew Nichols went to Chaplin's, bought it, and tore it up. That's what Bessie thinks. So this, if anybody ever finds the millionth book, I will be very pleased to I spent £1,000 for it. What I've discovered, things I've discovered since I did the book, I've got some memorabilia here I'd let you see. There's only one thing that's really valuable, so don't nick it when it goes round. I'll tell you what the memorabilia is, so you think. This is a flyer from his very, very first pictorial guide, because he did it himself, published it himself, put all the money up himself. And in this flyer, which is fascinating, the flyer is fascinating for several reasons. One is, you should send all the orders and remittance to Henry Marshall, and with his name and address. And Henry Marshall was the librarian at Kendal Borough, and he's a sort of working colleague of Wainwright, and Wainwright got him to be the front man and got him to do. And Henry Marshall, this is one of the, Wainwright behaved badly, I think, to his first wife Ruth, and he behaved badly to this bloke Henry Marshall. This bloke Henry Marshall worked so hard for no money and no credit for the first 5 books, sending out the copies, taking the orders, going around the bookshops, doing everything. He's long since dead. I spoke to his daughter, and his daughter said he was devastated when after the 5th guide, the Northwestern Fells, whatever, Wainwright dumped him. And by that time they'd shifted 40,000 copies, which physically Henry Marshall had taken the orders for and got them into the shops. So he was dumped, which is a great shame. So this thing is quite interesting from that point of view. But it's also fascinating because this flyer for the very, very first book of the series, it says the author is Alfred Wainwright. Can you see? I'll send it round. Now, as we know, he went through life making jokes about it. He wouldn't tell people what A was. He said Aloysius, perhaps. Remember that silly joke? And he always signed him A. Wainwright. But before it was coming out, he was actually thinking seriously of calling himself Alfred Wainwright, which he didn't in the end. So there's that to look at. This is, it's a photostat, but this is from when he was an accountant in 1939. And of course there was no computers, no internet, so Roger would have been out of work totally. And all of you would never have met, would you? So he does everything by hand, all these ledgers. So this you can look at to see his beautiful immaculate handwriting.